Hello everyone and welcome to G Crochet Off the Hook. Thank you so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it. I hope you're enjoying my little crochet journey that I'm sharing. Today we are going to be chatting about upsizing yarn or making it thicker than it was intended to be and what my experience has been. And I do hope you all enjoy this one too. Okay folks, I'm going to introduce you to some of the yarn that I have on my table here. These are all DK yarns, although they have different hook sizes recommended. This one recommends a 4.5 to 5 millimeter hook. This one recommends a 3.75 to 4.5 millimeter hook. This one recommends a 3.5 millimeter hook, and this one recommends a 4 millimeter hook. As I say, these are all noted to be DK yarns. And when I made this beanie in, you might have seen it in last week's beanies that I'd made so far this year. This is the Granny Stitch beanie by MJ's Off the Hook, and I actually needed a chunky yarn to do this. I wanted to do the adult size that her tutorial showed, and I really had my eye on this yarn. I thought the colors were fun, and in a Granny Stitch I thought it would come out really pretty. But like we've just seen now, this says it's a DK yarn. The hook size recommended on the label was a 3.5 millimeter hook. Now, over the years of crocheting, I have learned to know the yarns that I have available to me and attempt to make them chunky and sometimes even bulky when I need to, for depending on whatever the project is. So for this particular one, what I did was double up this yarn so that I could go from using this hook with it to this hook so that I could get this result. And to do that, what I did was, I hope I'm all in the camera here, is I always store, if I have made little skeins of yarn, I normally put a little snip knot in here for me so that I know it's my little pull tag. Anyway, so what I did with this yarn was I created myself an S. Superman. I can take the slip knot out now. But I did create myself an S. Then I pinched where the beginning tail was with the rest of the S together. And however you do it, I created myself a slip knot. And my one strand that I'm going to work, that I would have worked with a 3.5 millimeter hook, I was now going to work with 3 of these strands together to give me a chunkier yarn. Now how this would work is, and I'll just crochet a few stitches, 1, 2, 3, right. As you eat up your yarn with your hook, the 3 that you've put together are going to become, well, eaten up by the hook. And you would need to feed this little loop with more of the yarn from your ball to continue to give yourself the 3 yarns like this. So all you need to do is pull that yarn from the skein through that little loop. Now, I don't know that there's a recommended amount that you need to pull, but I normally, depending on the project, pull as long as my arm can go, like that. Oh, I'm sending everything flying now. Okay, and then we would be able to just carry on crocheting. So I'm going to crochet over. Excuse me. Losing my voice there. I'm going to crochet over where we've just pulled through that new little loop. And off we go. And we're giving ourselves a much chunkier yarn than the little one that we were working with. I'm just going to continue for a little bit more until I see I'm about to lose the 3 strands that I created. There we go. And then the process would begin again. You would just grab the strand that's coming from your skein through this little loop, as long as your arm can go, and you're set to crochet again. Now, this has really worked well for me because I don't often have very thick yarns on hand. I'm going to just crochet back a wee bit. I've recently been working with much thinner yarn, so this big hook feels clumsy in my hand. Anyway, so off we would go, just to see. So this is a much chunkier project than what you would have had if you were only using with a strand of yarn. Now, things that I've learned. What happens, so you have your working, you have your 3 strands. If you get to the end again, you're going to pull it through and off you go with your chunky yarn. Now what happens if during the project you realize for whatever reason you've made a mistake, color doesn't tickle your fancy anymore, whatever it is, and now you need to frog. So what happens if you frog your project? Well, we'll do it together. You need to keep a consistent pressure on the 3 strands pinched together. You don't want to accidentally have pressure on only 2. You see what you're going to start creating or not? So let's try and pull that back in order. There we go. So you do need to bear in mind that when you frog, and we have just frogged one join where we looped the yarn ball through there, if you can see that. You do just need to have good pressure on all 3 of the strands as you're unraveling so that you don't cause, I'll just show that once again. Say for instance you, for whatever reason, are only pinching these 2 and that one's getting left behind, you'll give yourself a bit of a headache with that, especially if you know, often we're not always looking at what we're doing. We can always multitask while we crocheting. So you could, if you haven't gone too far, bring it back in line and you unravel your project and you'll be back to just the S that you started with. Now you decide you want to repurpose this yarn though, because it's really not what you wanted for this project. What happens now, because you've already looped everything through here? Do you just cut off, discard what you were busy using and leave it at that? Well, sometimes, yarny friends, that is exactly what you do if doubling like this and you have to frog gives you a headache. However, you can pull that front beginning piece. It's already starting to knot over here. And then you sit with this. You have to be mindful that if you're going to really not use this whatever, and you frogged a whole project or halfway through a project or a third of a project, unless you are paying attention to how you put this back into the skein that you have, you are going to end up with a wonderful mess. Now, fortunately, this is yarn scrap. Not scrap. No, yarn is actually scrap. It's just for a yarn end project. So I am going to lose this for demonstrating purposes. But that is how I turned this 3.5 millimeter recommended hook size yarn, which it did say is DK, into some gorgeous squishy yarn for this beanie. Now, where did I put? There's my needle. And I wanted to just share with you. So if we had a look here, this is a stitch. I can get this under here. There's our stitches. Of these stitches, if I lift up for you here, you can see there's that 1, 2, 3 that's creating this thick yarn over here. So there's a good way to upsize from a very thin weight to a thicker weight. The downside is if you need to frog, keep tension on your strands that you're pulling. And if you really need to unravel those 3 together, be very patient, because you won't actually just be able to pull it loose. Now, over the years, I've had to do doubling up of yarn for various reasons. And I did think I was very clever. Oh, I want a chunky yarn. Well, I can just use my wool winder and put the 2 strands together, so I don't have to pull from anywhere but center pull from my ball that I've wound up. And again, yes, you could give yourself a nice chunky bit of yarn to work with. And again, I'll just crochet a couple of stitches. And of course, there's things to remember when you are crocheting too, that you always pick up however many strands you've got. You don't just pick up the one. You need to be mindful that you're going through the strands that you've had. Now, so you're doing your chunky yarn, you're enjoying it, but you need to frog for whatever reason. Again, tension on having both or however many strands you've put together pulling off at the same time. There we went through only that one stitch. It came undone. Fine. So next time around, we remember to pick up both those strands. And it unravels rather easily. No problems with that. However, if you've done a very long project and for whatever reason you need to frog again, and you want to make this single ply again, you know what I mean, single strands again, like back to its DK instead of chunky. Having wound it in to a skein like this with both yarn ends together, just from my experience, is a nightmare and not worth the attempt, because you would very painstakingly need to start and continue to do this the whole way through, is wind up one and keep doing the same with the second one. Now, I have had to do this for reasons where I needed the yarn. But so that is what we're sitting with. You would have to do it bit by bit and keep it separate, but it is doable. Not like the other one, you wouldn't have to really cut and decide to give up on the other piece. So that's the second way, is actually using your wool winder and double the strands up together so that as you pull, they're already as however many you needed them to be. The other way, which is very popular, which I think this is the first way we used to do things from the beginning, is if you just have your normal skein and you also wanted to double this up, you would have your center pull and you would be pulling from this side. So as you're crocheting, your yarn's doing this, and this is what often happens. This will get to a point where it crosses over with this one, and you can land up with this thing giving you a headache of being completely cross-eyed with the ball of yarn. The other thing is, if you do work with this one on a project, just for pretend's sake, since I've done it for the others, there we go, and you need to pull loose, yes, there's nothing wrong with pulling loose. Hold tension on the two strands and off you go. To wind this up again is not fun. You would need to start with a piece that wasn't coming from the center pull. You'd need to start winding up with what was coming from around and around the ball, and this is small, so we shouldn't have too many problems. But then you're left with everything you had from the center pull. So don't make problems where you need to frog or reuse the yarn in a different place. You need to know that you're committed to wanting to use it like this. And then lastly, this is my easiest way, is I normally wind them up into a bobbin, and I grab myself one of my, not a yarn ball, don't have a yarn ball, and I normally throw that in there. So I have my center pull and I have this, but unlike this one, it's not going to twist and twist and twist. It very nicely, I'll do this last one too. You see, it just unwinds over itself. I don't know if it's picking it up, but it will very easily not tangle. So if I'm going to do a center pull and the outside, I normally create myself a little cake to use, and no problem if you need to frog, as long as you hold on to both strands as you're frogging. This one, similar to the other one, if we needed to put it back together, it does create a bit of wastage because we're winding that bit up and then we're left with the center pull. So although there aren't any tangles, you have to be mindful of what you pulled out with it. So there we go. That's my 4 different ways of creating yarn to be of a heavier size thread that I might need for a project. And yes, I have also done this with amigurumi. I had this beautiful yarn. It was said to be DK, and the hook size was a 3.5, and I wanted to use the colors together, so I did pull from the inside and from the outside. I used a 2.5 millimeter hook, and I got this little beauty. The color changes are subtle, but I know that they're there. For instance, the limbs come out a bit different, the ears are all a little bit different as the color changed. And with this one you can see too, for instance, I get this under, that's the actual stitch, and there are the two little yarn strands that made it a little bit thicker to work with. I do and have done very tiny thread makes, but that really does make my hand ache, which is why, for instance, even with this pretty yarn, I doubled it up so that I could get this cutie. And this was a make I made last year, so I did have a quick squiz. This was a pattern from Instagram, and I had used Rena_toys, and I used this Kismet's Tiny Tots cake with a 2.5mm hook. It's all 100% acrylic, and I think she turned out quite sweet. So that's all for now about resizing yarn. Moving on to something about random acts for crochet kindness. I have been making little hearts like this, just randomly. I'll sit down and make a whole lot of these little hearts. Last year, April, I did some pocket prayer makes and a little pocket prayer. I'm sure there are lots out there. I tweaked this one for what I wanted to put with these little hearts, and it just says, "Prayed for you. May you be embraced by God's love. May He walk before you as guidance, behind you to keep you secure, beneath you to provide strength, and above you for blessing, and within you to offer peace." Now I've been handing these out without the pocket prayer. That's something new that I started doing last year, April. And my eldest started at a new school this year. She's a teacher. And I know I gave her one of these for her first few weeks. And she came home and she said, "Yo, Mommy, I've been rubbing this little heart in my pocket." And she did bring her little pocket prayer home too. And she said, "But I do have a suggestion. We might need to laminate these," because she had been rubbing heart and the pocket prayer. I will be doing that shortly, is just laminating these so that if you're carrying your little pocket prayer with you and you are rubbing that as well, it won't turn to mush. So that's my little random acts of crochet kindness. And then I also made these fidgets last year, towards the end of last year. And there is a fabulous tutorial from Jenny in my spare time crochet. I haven't made any this year. These were still from last year. And I know that the teachers have had a week of assessments. You know, they also have a lot of paperwork that we don't always know about that goes on behind the scenes. And my daughter wanted to just give her colleagues in their grade something to let them know they made it through this week and that all their efforts are appreciated. So these are going to go off to those teachers. We do appreciate you and all the work that you put in to educate our little ones. So I will wish you all happy crocheting over this coming weekend. Bye for now.